Welcome to the Black Hat edition of CyberBytes the podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Cooper, co-founder of Aspiron Search. I got the opportunity to sit down with Hugh Njemanze, president at Anomali. This was one of the week's most powerful podcasts. I got time to interview the Godfather of the SIEM. We discuss his career to date and how the SIEM has evolved over the 30 years of his career in enterprise software.
Right. And we're on. Introducing Hugh Njemanze, president at Anomali. How are you, mate?
Great. Good to see you.
Good to meet you. So you flew in from France yesterday?
That's right. I arrived last night. I spent about 10 days visiting my mom for her 95th birthday.
It's impressive, mate. It's really impressive.
Yeah.
We have a lot to talk about, but with all my guests, first of all, what I like to do is go right back to where it all began, how you got into the field, and we can go from there.
Okay. So I actually came to the U.S. to study aeronautical engineering, and my first computer science class that I took kind of turned my head, and I switched majors and ended up graduating in computer science, coming out to Silicon Valley, which I had never heard of, and worked for HP. So I was working on sort of pure computer science, if you will, operating systems, compilers, developer tools, and so forth. I was there for 5 years and got recruited into a small 8-person startup doing database connectivity software. And Apple acquired us a few months later, and we became Apple's first software company acquisition. So I ended up working at Apple for 6 years, so HP 5 years, and then Apple 6 years. So I would say I got a good grounding in some of the iconic companies and also their processes. And Apple was unique in the sense that pretty much everybody who worked at Apple, especially below the executive team, would bleed Apple if you cut them. It was very much a strong family in that sense. But they were going through ups and downs. This was between the two periods of Steve Jobs. Mm-hmm. So they would kind of hire a lot of people and then have a big reduction in force and so forth. I was there for 6 years, and right after I did my sabbatical in music school, I got recruited out of Apple into another startup. And each time it was because people who knew me recommended me to a startup. And then I got a call, and I resisted, and then I went. So I kind of was alternating between large company, small company. And there's good things to be said for both, but I really like small companies at the end of the day. Because it becomes clear that in a small company, you can actually affect outcomes much more quickly. And in a large company, even at the very top, you would be surprised how hard it is to affect any outcomes. And I've seen HP from both the bottom and the upper levels, and HP at the top is very, very hard to get things done. So I was at Apple for 7 years, 6 years, and I went to Verity, which was a search engine company. And this was right when, this was in 93, right when the internet showed up, Netscape came along. They needed a search engine for their browser and their web servers, and so we sold them one. And we eventually actually ended up going public within 2 weeks of Netscape. And the local newspaper, the San Jose Mercury News, described those as the 2 IPOs that put Mountain View, California on the map. So it was a lot of fun. And so that was my third kind of career in terms of going from operating systems and databases to search engines. And I left Verity after 7 years to do a startup with funding and no agenda. So, which was an incredible opportunity, and started calling up large organizations as prospects to bounce ideas off of them. And the ideas I was bouncing off them had nothing to do with security. But somehow over and over, the conversation kept coming back to what they were really lacking was technologies or products to make their security challenges easier. They had tools like firewalls. They were very verbose, generating lots and lots of logs, but nobody had time to read the logs. So they would either turn off verbose mode, or they would store all of those logs away without looking at them. And then if they stumbled across a security incident through other means, they would go back to the logs to provide as documentation and evidence to confirm firing the person involved or whatever. So the logs were a backup after the fact. It's kind of like you had to catch the murderer first before looking at the clues. Right? So they wanted a solution for that. By the time I heard that independently like 4 times, I thought, well, if you build what they're asking for, they will probably want it. So that's how ArcSight started. And we built a product to target that particular problem. And since I didn't have any background in security, I went to a couple of conferences. I went to a research conference and I went to a vendor conference. And the researchers had lots of great ideas and left the solution as an exercise for the reader. And the vendors had lots of solutions, but the software itself wasn't very robust or informed by a software academic background. These were security people trying to write software as opposed to software people trying to do security, which is what I became.
Yeah.
So we had a gestation period of 9 months for our first product, and we delivered it right after 9/11.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah. So the
2001. Was
yeah,
it?
yeah. Like December of 2001, and 9/11 had happened 2 months earlier. Mm-hmm. The climate, actually before and after 9/11, because in 2000 there was a big meltdown of the dot-com economy. So Silicon Valley pretty much emptied out. The traffic jams went away. And the good thing for us was we had funding and an idea. And so we just built our product. We weren't worried about selling it. Then 9/11 happened and nobody could buy anything because all the IT departments had gotten their budgets frozen. It was a very uncertain time. People weren't sure what was going to happen next. And so you could get an audience to try your product. But when it came time to buy it, they were really kind of like, for example, banks were very interested because they're more regulated. And so all of the stuff that we were monitoring with the logs was interesting to them for their audits. However, they said, if you don't have a bank customer, we can't buy from you. Kind of a catch-22 situation.
Yeah.
Fortunately, when we went to do our A round of funding, Kleiner Perkins ended up leading the round, and they broke their moratorium. They hadn't invested in anything for 14 to 18 months since the dot-com crash. So one of the banks that was trying our product decided that if Kleiner Perkins was investing, that was as good as a bank preference. So we got our first bank, and then the others fell like dominoes.
Yeah.
And then we had a very exciting time about a year after that where several government agencies got interested in our product.
Okay.
And we went to some hidden basements in Virginia, conducted some testing. They had red teams attacking our product. And we overcame all that and got deployed in many services and other agencies with fewer letters in their names. So it was great validation of what we were building, because essentially the concept was very much like a VCR. It's like record all the events, be able to fast forward through them, forwards or backwards, sift out what's going, and then do timeline correlations so that you can tie the same incident together from multiple different sources of information by lining up the sequence of events in all the different evidence chains. And so we became the dominant player in the newly named SIEM space, Security Information and Event Management. Eventually, we decided to go public and picked the worst possible year, which was 2008.
Yeah.
That was a year that no tech companies, I think we were the only tech company that actually managed to go public that year, which we did on Valentine's Day. So,
Nice.
yeah. So, and then 2 years later, we had people trying to acquire the company. At this time, we were a public company. And so we thought, the trouble with if you're public and somebody tries to acquire you, you can't just say no, because your shareholders might sue you later. Like if the stock ever goes down, they'll say you could have sold it back then.
Yeah.
And so then they sue you, second guessing your every move, of course. So once you're in play, then it's not so much deciding whether to say yes or no. It's deciding whether you want to at least choose your suitor, which we did. So we ended up getting acquired by HP, which one of the advantages was that it was a local company for us, being based in Silicon Valley. Yeah. And it also happened to be my first company I worked at out of college, so I actually got to keep my old employee badge number.
Wow.
Was reinstated. So ended up back at HP in 2010. Just in time to witness from inside HP going through its own turmoils. They had a couple of CEOs that were of short duration during that period. But we actually continued growing, so it was actually a positive experience for us. And hopefully we were a positive addition to HP. So, so I actually retired from the workforce a couple of years after that acquisition, and went to Kleiner Perkins actually as an entrepreneur in residence. And I think the VCs generally, they're kind of the way they operate is they'll put you back in their stable and hope to gestate a new company that they will be on the ground floor of. So it's a win-win situation for them. But while I was doing that, Greg Martin actually showed up, an ex-colleague from ArcSight looking for funding. And together with another colleague of mine, we put in the seed money to start ThreatStream, which became Anomali after I took over the reins. So, yeah.
When did you take over the reins?
So I was there at the founding because we put in the seed money, and I was on the board from day one. But when we went to do our A round, about a year later, our lead funder of the leader of the A round, which was Google Ventures, convinced me to take the reins, which I did.
I told somebody that I was going to be speaking with you, and they said that you were the Godfather of the SIEM. Have you heard that before?
I have heard that before.
What's the, for the audience that don't know, what is the SIEM, but how has it evolved over the last, 15 years or so?
20 years.
20, wow.
So SIEM, first of all, it stands for Security Information and Event Management. So a lot of tools, not just security tools, generate logs. So, and a log's basically kind of like a grocery list of what it's been up to, right? So if it's a firewall, it will be a list of traffic that was either accepted or denied, because a firewall is there to let the good stuff through and push back on the bad stuff. So the logs say this was accepted, this was denied. That's what those logs are, okay? And a network switch or router is going to have logs of which packets came in and where they were sent. Right, so basically it describes what that particular tool has been up to, and the tool could be anything. It doesn't have to do with security. However, the logs might be interesting for security. Like an operating system log could tell you who logged in, when did they log out, how many times did they try to log in before they got in. Because if they don't know the password and they're guessing, might not be the owner. If they try 100 times, probably isn't the owner, right? So what you want to do is you want to be able to make use of those logs. And in the case of an operating system log, a human is going to it might take them a few minutes to try to log in 20 times. But a firewall could accept or reject 1,000 packets a second, 5,000 packets a second. So in security, both of those types of logs are interesting. In IT, mostly it's the human level logs that are interesting. So it's a small volume relatively. But in security, the rate at which logs come in is what constituted the problem that we set out to solve. In fact, the state of the art at that point, for even before SIEM, for something to ingest logs was about 150 events per second. Our first product was doing over 1,000 events, and a few generations later, we were close to 100,000. We were above 75,000 events per second. So we continuously, throughout our life, kept doubling the speed of our ingestion, and we started out like already 6x of the state of the art. So basically, it was a big data problem, and in fact, the way we built the product was to be platform, sort of domain agnostic, be a platform that you could have put any problem into the hopper. And it just turned out security was the most interesting domain for a platform of that type of power. So that's what we did. So all of us basically went to school and got security certifications and learned about SANS and learned about all the different certifications you could get. And we took them, we studied them, and we passed them. But mostly we were focused on writing good code that would make it easy to manage this information and to derive value out of it. Right? And it turns out security is actually compelling in its own right once you get deeper into it, because it's the one field where you have an active opponent that's alive. Right? If you're designing toasters, there's no opponent. You know, the toaster is pretty much left in peace. But when you're writing security software, there is somebody somewhere actively trying to make it obsolete from day one. So you have to anticipate what they're going to do to it and then respond to the things that they do to it that you didn't anticipate. It's like a continuous cat and mouse game. So basically, it's like being an arms provider and you're trying to give the good team better weapons or at least effective countermeasures, right? And so it just never gets boring.
What about Anomali? What are you doing? What are you doing there?
Yeah, so back in the ArcSight days, the one thing that I thought was kind of an opportunity or a promise that hadn't been realized was that if people would do neighborhood watches and share information with each other, that you could be more effective in the sense that the first victim could inoculate subsequent victims from being taken advantage of, right? So you could say, this is what happened to us, this is how we discovered it, this is how we remediated it, and this is how maybe you can prevent it, right? So that whole sort of flow, if we could find a way to support that flow in technology. And so in the ArcSight days, I actually talked to a lot of customers. And when I would talk to a bank, they would say, we'd love to do that, but our corporate counsel would see us, one bank, talking to another bank as a leak of IP. It's like competitive information sharing. You know, if you're talking to those guys across the street, you must be up to something no good. You know, we should maybe reprimand or more, right? So there was a cultural challenge. And the government agencies would generally say, we'd love to be part of a neighborhood watch kind of sharing thing, but we're only going to ingest, we're not going to share with anybody because that's how we do, right? And even amongst agencies, they would say, we're fine with taking information from other agencies, but we won't give them ours because we wouldn't trust them with ours. So it was just an amazing set of kind of roadblocks, all cultural, not technology roadblocks. So Anomali turned out to be a better place to solve that problem than ArcSight would have been, for the reason that ArcSight had already kind of established a certain kind of dominance in the market. And so we had maybe more than two or three times more business than the next competitor down. And so if you come out with a standard for sharing information and your whole installed base adopts it, that's not good enough when you're trying to communicate with everybody. So you'd want all of the competitors to also adopt the standard. But then that usually leads to a bureaucratic type of, well, let's put out some competing proposals, and then actually getting it done becomes less important than the process, right? Where the beauty of doing it from the Anomali vantage point was that we were focused on sort of the next level above SIEM, which is taking intelligence being not IQ, but information about what's going on, right? So intelligence is if you have a list of people that are known terrorists and shouldn't board planes, right? Then you make a no-fly list. That's the intelligence you have, is that no-fly list. And then you check every passenger at the airport, right? So versus, let's say, the airport security devices themselves, supposing that the vendors for those were balkanized. But if you can hand the list to everybody, then they'll all use the list. And that's the position we were in with Anomali, was we were distributing intelligence from all the intelligence vendors agnostically to the SIEMs. And so it doesn't matter whose SIEM you're using, we can disseminate intelligence to you. So that makes us a perfect platform to build a neighborhood watch capability, because people are buying commercially available intelligence. They're generating their own intelligence from their research teams, and they are joining what are known as ISACs, which are information sharing communities, typically organized along business verticals. So there is an ISAC for retail, one for healthcare, one for finance, and so forth. Maybe like 25 to 50 categories overall around the world, with North America being the most developed. They have ISACs for everything. In fact, a lot of organizations in other countries are either multinationals and will subscribe to an American ISAC, or even if they're not multinational, they will still collaborate with the American ISACs, like FS ISAC, which is the finance ISAC. And so what we did is we built a technology platform to make it culturally easy to share your own intelligence that you're generating in your research team. Because by this point, large organizations were starting to have dedicated threat intel research teams in addition to whatever commercial stuff they were subscribing to. Government agencies were starting to build local repositories of threat intelligence. In other words, if you're in the Middle East or in Europe, you might find that there's some intelligence that's kind of globally interesting, but there's some intelligence that's of local interest. And so we built tools to make it possible to, first of all, manage all that, do your own original research, and also collaborate with other organizations and share intelligence back and forth. And there were a lot of non-obvious features that we ended up building based on feedback from live end users, such as if you're going to collaborate with somebody on how to respond to a threat that you've experienced, maybe you're in a circle, we call them trust circles. You're in a circle of 12 banks, and so you know you're talking to another bank from this circle, but you don't have to know which one it is, right? Because people don't want their dirty laundry aired. They don't want to say, well, we got breached by somebody, right? But they might want to tell you, watch out for this breach. And so long as you don't know which of the 12 banks we are, it's all good, right? So we made it so that you could do that. Also, when they're communicating, maybe they're giving each other advice on how you can remediate. They didn't want to actually type in free text, because then you might recognize somebody's writing style. So we would put pull-down menus with all the likely conversations, and you could pick, and then that way your voice wasn't corrupting the conversation, as it were. So these are things that aren't obvious until somebody with a stake is using it, and then they tell you, well, this is going to be more likely to be popular if it can do this, right? And then we would tweak it. So that became a very interesting part of our platform. And what we noticed at the same time is that the volume of threat intelligence was growing exponentially. From 2014 to 2015 to 2016, went from 100,000 to 1 million to 10 million to 100 million indicators that we were managing for any single customer. And these are all the lists of information about activity, bad actors, bad domains, bad IP addresses, etc. Bad file hashes, which are the code, the hash code of a malicious executable versus the pristine one that came out the box from the vendor. Actually, some vendors have shipped software that was already compromised. So the official blessed release couldn't be trusted. But once you know that, then you can use the hash to detect, okay, this is a bad file, right? So the volume was increasing so fast that the SIEMs could not ingest this amount of threat intelligence. Because what the SIEMs are doing is they're handling billions of logs. And they can do that without breaking a sweat, the robust ones. But when you add threat intelligence into the mix, it's not just another log. Okay, it's something to compare to the logs. So if we go back to our airport analogy, if you've got 1 million passengers a day in either the Vegas airport or the San Francisco airport, and you have a list of 10 bad guys to check for, then that's 10 million checks, right? It's 10 names against each passenger. Mm-hmm. And then if one day they hand you a phone book, then at least you jump to the first letter of their name and you try to find it on that page, right? But what if they hand you an unsorted phone book? You have 1 million passengers and 1 million names. You have to mash up against each other. It becomes just intractable, right? So that's the problem we had to solve, because it was two different volumes. It was the volume of events and the amount of intelligence we have, which SIEMs were not designed for. And I know it because we designed a prototypical SIEM. So we decided that was actually the next interesting problem to solve, which is, and I'll tell you what people were doing in the meantime out of a pragmatic sense of solving the problem, was to filter down to a small subset of the intelligence that we're buying that the SIEM could ingest. Okay? So you buy a subscription that gives you 10 million indicators and you send 100,000 of them to the SIEM, you're basically getting 1% of what you're paying for, right? It's like you're looking for a needle in a haystack. Literally. And you don't search the haystack, you grab a cup of hay and search the cup, right? And you hope that that's where the needle is, right? Doesn't matter if the needle is elsewhere in the stack or if there are tons of needles, right? All you can do with the tool you have is search the cup. So that's what people did. So basically that was filtering the intelligence down to what would fit in the bucket over there, right? So, of course, for us, the immediate challenge was we want to compare all of the intelligence against all of the logs. And another industry term for logs is telemetry, right? So all of the telemetry against all of the intelligence. Simple enough question, but very tough technological problem. And so that's what we set out to build. And we built a product that we, first of all, renamed the company from ThreatStream to Anomali. Yep. And then secondly, and that product was Anomali, and the first product managing the threat intelligence was ThreatStream. And then we renamed the Anomali product to Match, because what it does is matches these two sets of data, right? While keeping the Anomali name, which I think names that start with the letter A, that are words you can kind of relate to or recognize, are good company names, like ArcSight.
Yeah, for sure, mate, for sure. What's next? Are we going for another one? Another
name
company
or another
beginning
company?
with A?
It's probable that it will begin with A if there's another one.
You can't help yourself.
Yeah.
You've already retired once.
That's right. Yeah.
So just continuing on the journey of Anomali and where are we going to take it?
Well, right now what we've done is we've been cloud first since inception, but we've also always provided the choice of form factor. So there are many geographies where people still prefer on-premise. And so we let you deploy the technology either pure cloud, pure on-premise, which we call air-gapped, and then hybrid, which lets you have your own data that is on-premise and still interact with the rest of the world for neighborhood watch and community sharing and subscriptions to commercial intelligence. So, but Match, which was actually ingesting the customer's telemetry in addition to threat intelligence, customers have always preferred that on-prem up till now. And I think finally we're at an era where it's actually not just feasible, but desirable for companies to move even their sort of crown jewel data into the cloud. And so a year ago we released Match Cloud, but we also completely re-architected it so that it's a next generation cloud architecture as opposed to a port, right? And the difference with a port is the old technology in a new skin, where what we have is the new technology performing to its utmost. And so we're literally talking a different scale of performance. Match was already a very, very fast product, which is why it could solve the problem of a massive number of threat intel indicators against a massive number of logs. But what we have now is at another level because we're using the full power of the cloud with instant ramping up and down. So basically it's much more cost effective because the power explodes on demand and idles when it's not being used and you're not paying for the idling, right? So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Hugh, absolute pleasure having you on, my man. Thanks for sharing that.
It's a lot of fun to chat with you.
I wish you all the best, mate.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed today's show, please like and share with your friends and colleagues, as this is really important for the show's reach. If you'd like to be our next guest or are interested in Aspron Search's staffing solutions, please get in touch directly with me or reach out to us via our website www.aspronsearch.com.